military and police breakdown of Resident Evil 3 from Tactical Lore. This is not a review, just a general tactical analysis of the main game from a story and gameplay perspective with a few observations here or there. What I won't be doing is nitpicking every little detail for the sake of measuring my PP. If that's what you want to see, there are plenty of expert YouTubers out there that can scratch that itch.
Main scenario.
The actual main scenario of Resident Evil 3 is quite realistic. I don't mean literally like zombies and super viruses, but the main plot of a disaster resulting in a ton of state, federal, private assets, all with their own missions and agendas, is something that has happened before. So, Carlos is a mercenary for the Umbrella Biohazard Countermeasure Service. They have their own mission. In Resident Evil 3, I believe it's VIP rescue and asset retrieval in this case. The scientist Dr. Bard, the vaccine, and also the rescue civilians, which may have just been covered. Also happening around the same time, Hunk is leading the Alpha team as part of the Umbrella Security Service, doing the same, but for the G-Virus and Dr. Birkin. Let's put a pin on that for now. You have R.P.D. along with some STARS members, Mr. X and Nemesis, which I'll just call special units, tracking their own objectives, one of which is the elimination of STARS, which UBCS is working with. We'll come back to this. Military forces, so the planes that nuke the city would be military. Also running around the game, you see some possible equipment belonging to military units, probably National Guard or reserves. In real life, let's take a large-scale disaster like Hurricane Katrina and the aftermath. Here we had federal agencies, so Department of Homeland Security, FEMA specifically.
George Bush doesn't care about black people.
State and federal assets, Army Reserve units. I knew someone who was there with a reserve unit from another state, actually. Active duty military, I believe the 82nd was there. National Guard units. Units like the Army Corps of Engineers, local police units like New Orleans Police Department, and this is where it gets interesting, you also had a crap ton of military contractors. You can call them mercenaries if you'd like. Blackwater and ISI, for example, according to news articles like The Guardian, and they did everything from guarding special facilities to patrolling certain areas and escorting VIPs. So, if something like the outbreak in Raccoon City did occur, I would actually expect to see something very similar to what's in the game. State, local, federal, and private units, each sort of doing their own thing, sometimes cooperating, sometimes with confusing jurisdiction and overlapping areas of responsibility. And being that Umbrella is a large company part of the industrial military complex, because they do make bioweapons and according to the lore, also regular weapons, I would expect to see them subcontract and have multiple units and branches deployed at the same disaster area, each with their own objectives. Let's talk about their special units.
Special units.
So, let's switch back to real-world examples again. In a large-scale military operation, let's say a war zone, militaries have multiple units, each with their own objectives and capabilities. If there are targets that are very important to either defend or take out, you send whatever unit is ideally best suited for the task. Back when I deployed to OIF, they had the playing cards with high-value targets on there. Saddam Hussein was the ace of spades, Chemical Ali was the king of spades, so on and so forth. Apparently, this practice of identifying important targets in war goes back to at least World War II with spotter decks that had different military vehicles on there, and is still used in more recent conflicts such as the Russo-Ukrainian War. These targets are of high value because they either command forces, are wanted, or, and this is applicable to Resident Evil 3, because they have special knowledge. This can be tactical knowledge or technical know-how. A recent example would be targeting a nuclear scientist, someone who makes IEDs, or someone who defected from your government. This brings us to journalists from Raccoon City, scientists who defected from Umbrella, and the surviving STARS members.
But right now it's got a hard-on for the only two STARS left in town, you and me.
From the original bunch that made it out of the mansion, you have Chris Redfield, Jill Valentine, Barry Burton, and Rebecca Chambers. From Umbrella's point of view, not only is it logical for the survivors to be high-value targets, I'd argue the rest of STARS are as well. Usually, SWAT teams, even in my line unit in the Army, experienced folks will officially or unofficially spread knowledge. The Army purposely does this by sending Ranger Regiment officers back to conventional units, which helps expand the officers' experience, but also helps them spread their knowledge. My second company commander came from the 75th, and I was in a normal mechanized infantry unit. So if STARS members have actual battlefield experience on how to defeat a lot of the bioweapons, you can bet your ass they've already spoken to the other STARS members about it. So even beyond the issue of exposing Umbrella, tactically speaking, they are a priority. They would know what caliber weapons to use, weaknesses, strengths, etc. Not to mention, there is always a possibility they are part of the 10% of the population that has natural immunity to the T virus. Resident Evil 3 alludes to the virus possibly being airborne. I believe it made its way to the city's water system, and yet Jill is not infected by the beginning of Resident Evil 3, at least not in a way that she can't operate. So it's not out of the question for Umbrella to assume some STARS members may have immunity. So yeah, if that's the case, after some STARS members have already taken out a Tyrant and other bioweapons in the Spencer Mansion, you don't play around. You send in your best assets to take them out, in this case Nemesis, and stop those potential countermeasures developed against your bioweapons from spreading to other units. You send in your other special unit, Mr. X, for other valuable targets, witnesses, get virus samples, etc. And yeah, wouldn't be surprised if each branch is also vying for more funding, power, etc., with the remake indicating Nemesis is from the European branch, and I'd say it's a better product than Mr. X.
Made in Germany. You know the Germans always make good stuff.
Alliances.
Remember how I mentioned Jill was working with UBCS but targeted by Nemesis, but both units are from Umbrella. There's plenty of examples in battlefields of certain sides that are allies working with some units, groups, or people that are considered enemies within the same side. The Syrian war had complicated factions, and also check out how some governments will use local assets for goals that can shift. Someone might be an asset to one unit or government and a target for another, like arms dealers, for example.
Tactical tidbits.
The initial fall Jill takes in the vehicle from the parking lot is actually survivable. I believe it's due to crashing head first. Vehicles are designed to take this kind of impact very well. There's at least one story of a lady surviving a fall in her car from a 7-story parking garage. I think it was a BMW.
A BMW plunged 7 stories off the side of a parking garage, and somehow the driver survived the fall.
This thing's made in Germany. You know the Germans always make great stuff.
The dual magazine doubles the capacity of Carlo's assault rifle from 32 shots to 64, but if you look at it, it's just a magazine coupler. In real life, it wouldn't double your ammo capacity for one magazine, it just makes it easier to reload. It would be interesting if instead of doubling your magazine capacity, it would just make reloading faster every 2 magazine changes, but reloading in shooting games is a very hard mechanic to make realistic, so I understand why they just did it that way. Also in real life, I'm sure this is essentially an M4 carbine. The magazines typically carry 30 rounds. Some people recommend 28. I always loaded it up to 30, but I wasn't special forces. I don't know. I've never had a problem with just loading magazines up to 30. I would not, however, load 32. I can imagine if it's a standard M4, AR-15, or M16 magazine, it would cause a problem. Now again, this just might be a special magazine only available in the Resident Evil universe and not real life. I am curious though as to why the developers went with 32 versus 30 or 64 versus 60. Carlos doesn't have a sling on his rifle. I don't think I've ever seen a unit go on any type of long-term operation without one in modern times. This was likely due to game design, as animating a sling is a bigger headache for something most people just wouldn't notice, and you can see why having a sling is a good idea in the cutscene where he carries Jill. He essentially leaves his rifle on the floor. It's interesting that Umbrella made some dud bioweapons but still used them, like the Gamma Y Frog weapons, who were weak to fire. So in real life in Desert Storm, Abrams tanks had an issue with the filtration system, but it had to be modified by jerry-rigging covers, or additional cleanings, and later on just getting a whole new filtration system altogether. That's why nothing beats actual combat data for any type of weapon. Jill being trained to pick locks is, believe it or not, realistic. In my old police department, we had some people get trained to pick locks through the police department, and there are multiple lock-picking courses for police and military out there.
Final thoughts.
I had played the OG Resident Evil 3 back in 1999. I didn't get all the way through the game. I played it for about a weekend. I stayed away from the remake until now since it was on sale. And honestly, I actually enjoyed the remake quite a bit. I wasn't too attached to the original since I didn't get a chance to truly play through it and I had a limited time with it. But yeah, it was a fun experience. I can see why people were a bit upset as it's a bit light on the content, the remake that is, compared to the other remakes. I wish Capcom would allow mods as DLC. I would honestly pay to get 1 or 2 mods on the consoles like the Doom games have, because some of the Resident Evil games have really good and fun mods. Either way, hope you enjoy it. Next Resident Evil video, I'll go over Resident Evil 4. Tactical Lore out.